4, 3, 2, 1.
Muy buenas tardes a todos y todas. Les damos la bienvenida a una nueva sesión del ciclo de debates Contrapuntos Chile-Unión Europea para el proceso constituyente, que hoy se centrará en el derecho a la vivienda. Esta actividad se realiza en el marco del Foro Chile-Unión Europea para el proceso constituyente, organizado por la Delegación de la Unión Europea en Chile, junto con el Programa EUROsociAL, el Centro Interfacultades de Derecho, Economía y Negocios de la Universidad de Chile, LECSEN, el Centro de Estudios del Futuro de la Universidad de Santiago y el Programa de Estudios Europeos de la Universidad de Concepción, con la colaboración del diario El Mostrador. En los últimos años hemos visto cómo el déficit de viviendas ha ido en aumento en nuestro país, multiplicándose los campamentos y los problemas habitacionales. El derecho a la vivienda no se encuentra contemplado en la Constitución de 1980 ni ha recibido hasta ahora desarrollo jurisprudencial. En este contexto, entonces, resulta relevante conocer algunas experiencias europeas en este ámbito. Es por esto que hoy tenemos dos interesantes invitadas, expertas en esta temática. Me gustaría primero dar la bienvenida a Laura Fregolent. Laura, no sé si está por ahí Laura, es arquitecta, doctora en ciencias y métodos para la ciudad y el territorio europeo, y profesora en urbanismo y tecnología de la Universidad di Venecia. Laura nos va a hablar sobre la vivienda pública y social en Italia. También tenemos como invitada a Susanne Bauer, quien es responsable de asuntos internacionales de la Viena Wohnen Kundenservice y presidenta del grupo de trabajo de vivienda Eurocities, quien nos hablará del modelo vienés de vivienda social y accesible. Entonces, primero vamos a invitar a Laura para que haga su exposición. ¿Está por ahí, Laura?
Thank you, Paula. I will share. Did you see the slide?
Sí.
Thank you. Well, good morning, and thank you for this invitation, of course. I will try, as Paula said, to describe the history of housing policies in Italy, focusing the attention on the principal steps linked to the law production. First of all, the right to housing is part of the Constitution, and this affected, of course, public policies of my country. In particular, in the first phase of the Republic, a home to Italian people was the slogan that synthesized the right to a house, but we need a further specification, above all a house owned, not the house for rent, and a question that influenced the choice and subsequent also the policies in the country. In fact, now more than 70% of Italian families live in their own homes, so property instead of a rental house. There are two main phases that characterize housing policies in Italy, as I said before. The first phase that began immediately after the Second World War, that show an active role of the state in the construction of public policies, with first of all the College from Fanny Plain. We are in 1949, an intervention system activated for the construction of houses for workers based on a loan that involves employees, employers, and the state. The Housing Reform Law in 1971 established the definition of public housing and inserting the sector within the welfare policies based on principle of housing needs and social and economic condition of the applicants. And the last, the 10-year plan for public housing in 1978, a tool for planning in a long-time housing construction. The mission is clear. The state has to take care of the housing question. In the second phase, some reforms, in particular, mark a point of discontinuity with the previous phase, with the past. First of all, the alienation of public housing, starting from 1993. With this law, were sold approximately 300 public houses. The abolition of a levy for public housing in 1995 and the progressive reduction of funding for public housing. The rental reform law in 1998, which liberalized the rental market, and the law and administrative decentralization in 1998, and then the constitutional reform of the Title V of the Constitution in 2001, which redefined the powers of the state in the field of housing policies. And starting from these reforms about housing policies, well, housing policies are not more exclusively competence of the state, but became also competence of the regions. I have to say something about the reform of the Constitution, because the Constitution, this reform assign to the state the determination of the essential levels of benefits concerning civil and social rights that must be guaranteed, including the right to housing, and so for low income groups. So this is very important, the confirmation of this right. After that, in 2007, the law for interventions for the reduction of housing deprivation for particular social categories marks the beginning of a new chapter in the national housing policies, citing for the first time the real estate fund as a tool, as a new tool to use. And between 2008 and 2009, the government implemented the two national housing construction plans. The intention of the plans was to relaunch the construction sector in time of crisis, of course, more than solve a problem of housing affordability. The law of 2008 defines the new word, defines social housing. What is social housing? And it defines it as the set of housing services aimed at satisfying basic needs. And the goal of the social housing policies is therefore to respond to an area of housing deprivation and social vulnerability that is not extreme, but constantly growing. We have this is important to say that, with a housing offer for rent at affordable costs. Social housing and the involvement, the progressive involvement of private sector is the new strategy of the countries, the new strategy of the state. The mission also in this second phase is clear. The market has to take care of the housing question. We also have to say that the progressive decrease of the involvement of the state and the increase of more market-oriented reforms within the housing sector, and this is something that happened not only in Italy, but in different countries of Europe, has stressed the situation, in my opinion, of housing affordability. Some data about today's situation. Public housing is estimated at around 900,000 units compared to more than 11 million units in Germany, more than 5 million in Great Britain, 5 million in France, and represent the 4.4% of total residential stock and 23.1% of rented stock. 45% of public housing is concentrated in the 12 large metropolitan areas of the country, and 2.2 million of people live in public housing. In some cities, the amount north and south of the country, the amount of public housing is big, such as Milan, Naples, Bologna, or Venice, where the amount on the total is around 9–10% of total dwelling. But the statistics at national level show warning sign of a growing number of people living in inadequate condition and or facing the risk of losing their dwelling. A report, for example, of the Caritas of 2018 highlights that the number of young homeless people is increasing, and half of the homeless population were aged between 35 and 54 years, so very, very young people. Privatization and the council housing and the government withdrawal from the control of the housing market and price regulation has, over the last decades, contributed, I think, to a negative effect, have a negative effect on the access to housing for the low-income groups. The image in the slide, show has until 2010 the decrease of public funds in the construction of public housing. As I said before, the role of the state between the first and the second phase is changed. That is due, of course, to a transformation of the society, but the housing problem is not solved because the needs are more articulated than the needs in the past. For example, the range of people who need a home has expanded, and we know we are speaking not of poor and disadvantaged people. The so-called gray area gathers people with a job, often precarious, with a degree, so with characteristics that make them too rich for a public house and too poor for a house to be acquired on the market. Another problem is eviction. for not paying rent that have sharply increased in recent years. Even if international comparison, we have to say, are scarce, and there are few descriptions of the processes leading to eviction. Eviction caused by not paying rent are more than doubled between 2005 and 2014, within a context of mismatch between increasing needs and availability of social housing. In contrast, in Italy, the Statistical Institute counts 7 million of empty housing units. And according to this source, a lot of these houses were built during the property boom in the run-up to the financial crisis of 2007, often as investments by people who never intended to live in them. Only a part are second houses for vacation. And this happened, I know, we know, not only in Italy, with different dynamics in the different countries, European countries, but also not only in Europe. A point that I want to underline is the lack of spatial analysis in the empirical literature. Research dealing with the housing affordability issues remains often spatial and does not indicate where the greatest affordability problems can be expected to be. While debate remains about how best to improve problem of affordability and we have to say the very different but associated problem of homelessness, spatial parameters of the problems need to be recognized, because many solutions will involve spatially situated provision of services. What I describe is the transition of the housing policies in Italy. That transition from public housing to social housing. And that this transition provides to attract private resource through the sale of residential accommodation within the project, the supply of urban land of rights through recourse to balance urban development, and introduction of public funds in support, of course, of the rental guarantee, to provide a different range of rents in order to promote the social mix and thereby avoid concentration of disadvantaged people, population group, to promote new means of action with particular reference to the construction of an integrated network of real estate ethical funds, to create a new social entrepreneurship. In this respect, we can mention a few actors who can be classified as social enterprises. Housing cooperatives of inhabitants, social cooperatives, foundation of banking or other origin. To characterize housing experience, to providing a range of services to match the needs of people, of inhabitants, and assist them. But two are the questions that I think in my country would to be considered in the future policies. An investment in both existing and new public housing, and a new rental policy. This is also, I think, a cultural question that we have to afford. I hope that this information will be useful for you and your constitutional process, and thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias por tu presentación, Laura. Sin duda, muchos puntos de convergencia con la problemática chilena y otros puntos que quedan para debatir. Desde ya invitamos al público que pueda ir haciendo algunas preguntas, que al final de la sesión recogeremos algunas preguntas del público para las expertas. Me gustaría ahora entonces invitar a nuestra segunda experta, que como ya lo habíamos anunciado es Susanne Bauer, quien es responsable de los asuntos internacionales de la Viena Kundenservice y presidenta del grupo de trabajo de vivienda de Eurocities. Susanne nos va a hablar sobre el modelo vienés de vivienda social y accesible, que es un modelo muy interesante para conocer. Susanne.
Bueno, gracias por invitarme a esta interesante sesión. Me siento muy honorada de formar parte de este proceso. Me llamo Susanne Bauer, trabajo por la ciudad de Viena, para Viena Wohnen, y también soy la presidenta del grupo de trabajo de Eurocities sobre la vivienda. Now I'm going to continue in English. You gave us several questions I'd like to answer, and the first was, is the right to adequate housing enshrined in the Austrian Constitution? And how does this enshrinement or absence of it affect public policies? Well, ladies and gentlemen, the right to housing is not constitutionally guaranteed in Austria. However, it is established by legislation. In the framework of the Austrian Social Aid Act, the provision for homeless people are formulated as follows. Support for homeless people and persons in extraordinary precarious situations comprises inter alia of the provision of housing of the development of new living perspectives. So in Austria, municipal housing owned by cities and municipalities and limited profit housing association offers a wide stock of affordable housing of broad levels of society. So I try to share my presentation. Yep. So you continued in asking, how have the public policies in Austria dealt with the housing problem? Well, municipal housing and social housing policies have a tradition of almost 100 years in Vienna. The aim was and still is to provide affordable, high-quality housing for a broad section of the population. Today, 60% of Viennese live in subsidized or municipal housing. Fair, transparent and affordable rents are a matter of course here. So what do we do as an active housing policy? To pursue an active housing policy here in Vienna is first and foremost a political commitment, and every country must define its own understanding of an active housing policy. In Vienna, at any rate, the self-image of taking responsibility for the social protection of people is generally very strong. Housing plays a decisive role in this because people and families with low incomes are particularly dependent on affordable housing and stable living conditions. However, truly affordable housing can only be realized to a limited extent with the yield expectations of private real estate investors. Therefore, the Viena housing program aims at continuously increasing the share of public and non, or as we say, limited profit housing. The limited profit housing oriented segment of the housing market guarantees that low-income households do not finance the return of investors through their rents. Oops. Just want to go on. Let's do it like this. In line with this approach, Vienna also favors object promotion. That means the promotion of the construction of residential buildings, which, in contrast to subject promotion alone, increases the stock of permanent socially committed social housing. In the past years, around 7,000 flats were subsidized annually. In addition, with the framework of refurbishment program we call gentle urban renewal, in existing neighborhoods, private rented flats are subject to a more temporary social obligation if housing subsidies are used for the refurbishment. As a rule, the rents in such subsidized housing remain capped for 15 years and serve exclusively to refinance the refurbishment cost. With this approach, it has been possible over the past 40 years to upgrade neighborhoods and at the same time to provide affordable housing in areas with few permanently socially committed flats. In addition, the city of Vienna also offers support for tenants of private flats with various services like facilities like neighborhood management or the arbitration offices for housing law matters and tenants assistance. Now, ladies and gentlemen, an active housing policy is also inclusive. Another essential point in Vienna's housing policy is that the housing is not exclusively addressed in relation to the lowest income groups of society. Adequate and affordable housing is a concern of broad sections of the population, and social housing in Vienna is therefore also targeted at the middle income earners. You might ask, what is the legal framework we are acting in? And now it gets interesting because we are a republic, and at the same time we've got a high developed federalism. So I will talk about different levels for the legal framework to achieve affordable housing. So in Austria, national and regional laws are part of a framework where housing policy and government takes place. A very important law on national level is the tenancy law. It contains the right and obligation of tenants, and it also has a strong focus on the protection for tenants. This gets very, very important. What are rights and obligations, and how can you mediate all in between? And also very important for the Austrian example are our limited profit housing act. It regulates the way not-for-profit building associations should perform and that they are obliged to reinvest profits. I will come back to this later on. Now, talking on behalf of Vienna, I'll also talk about regional laws. Which is really, really important, is the Viennese Housing Promotion and Renovation Act. It is the guideline for housing subsidies, I'll come back to, new construction, rehabilitation and housing assistance, and we have to bring them all together. And a very powerful tool is our building code. It regulates the matters of urban planning, zoning and the entire building industry, building technology, minimum room heights, minimum size flats, and so on and so forth. Our urban development plan is an important strategic tool in this context. For instance, it specifies whether an area is designated as green space, and Vienna has got 50% of green space, we still have got that, or for traffic purposes, for commercial buildings or housing constructions. What's also in our context and for our model, what is really important is a forward-looking land policy. A commitment to an active housing policy also presupposes an active and forward-looking land policy. After all, urban development needs land, and affordable housing requires, above all, affordable land. However, since in a growing city like Vienna, the demand and thus also the price for land are high, instruments are needed that are able to acquire sufficient land at affordable conditions for subsidized housing. For this purpose, the city of Vienna established a non-profit fund, the Wohn for Wien, as early as 1984. This fund is responsible for providing the land required for social housing in Vienna by acquiring it at a reasonable price and making it ready for construction. Currently, Wiener Wohn for Wien owns more than 2.7 million square meters of land reserves. Properties in all locations, such as agricultural land and former business premises, are continuously being purchased and actively developed. Now, talking about powerful instruments, the next one, which is really important in Vienna, is in our building code, the zoning category subsidized housing. With the introduction, which means law by the Parliament of Vienna, of the Viennese government, of the subsidized housing category in March 2019, the Vienna city government has set itself the goal of once again securing more land for subsidized housing, and thus continuing to make affordable housing possible for the Viennese. Wherever land is converted into residential areas, 2/3 are now earmarked for social housing, in order to continue to make affordable housing possible. This is intended to limit cost. At the same time, the construction of subsidized housing is to be promoted. Stricter legal requirements are also intended to prevent real estate speculation. The regulation has become effective for new dedications of 5,000 square meters and more usable residential space. Affected are areas that are designated as residential areas, mixed buildings areas, and the basic costs in subsidized housing are explicitly limited to 188 euros per square meter of gross floor above ground, and the rent threshold is €5.11 per square meter. So I'm continuing now with another very important pillar of our system called sustainable way of housing finance. Referring to this question of finance, I want to point out that Austria uses the instrument of housing subsidies based on an earmarked tax. That means 1% of net income, 50% paid by employees and 50% paid by employers, which adds up for the city of Vienna to 150 million euros per year. Additionally, the city of Vienna invests 311 million euros per year, which sums up to 461 million euros for new construction, urban renewal, and individual support. And it's quite important to know, by combining object and subject subsidies in Vienna, a large proportion of the population has access to affordable housing. The Vienna model of social housing is based above all on the goal to achieving social mix and settlements and to ensure constant new construction and securing of existing stock through renovation subsidies. And ladies and gentlemen, just allow me to point out that Austria has got a very cost-effective housing system. Housing costs for the state in Austria 0.5% of the gross domestic product. In Germany, it's 1.5%. In the USA, it's 2%. So I think we are quite economic with our system. I want to continue and come to the next chart. You only can do this. Oh, here it comes, sorry about that. If you have the cooperation with reliable partners. And in Vienna, the limited profit housing associations are a historically grown group of owners who are committed to a special socio-political goal and are subject to specific regulation on renting and rent levels, profit making, and reinvesting in the housing stock. All limited profit housing associations are still subject to the public benefit law, which has developed since 1910, and the current Limited Profit Housing Act, because it's really essential regulation for the rent level and investment strategies. These are the profit restriction, a limited return on equity or profit distribution, restriction to a maximum of 3.5% at present. And what's very important is the obligation to build and renovate. So surplus equity must be reinvested in social housing. What we are saying is promoting structures for the common good. Because unlike private investors, Limited Profit Housing Building Association build housing because it's their corporate purpose and not because housing is currently an attractive capital investment. Special attention must therefore be paid to the aspect as population growth in many cities will remain high in the medium term. This means that a high number of dwellings will have to be built continuously. Relying solely on private investors is sometimes risky, as low capital market interest rates are currently boosting housing construction. However, should capital market interest rates rise again, less private capital will flow into the housing construction, and growing cities would then have to try, with greater incentive than ever before, to maintain private housing production. And what Laura already mentioned is the social mix. Vienna doesn't want to have a situation where you can identify the social status of a person by their home address. Wherever you live, you'll find kinds of social grouping, and for Vienna, this is something most important thing to achieve and maintain for the city. Integration in economically mixed communities are the watchwords, along with high concept modernist architecture that in other European capitals would be the preserve of the well-to-do. In Vienna, you find a mix all over the city. And studies have shown that real integration of households of different professions, backgrounds, promotes social solidarity, reduces crime, improves health, increases also social mobilities, and avoids ghettoization. So to sum up briefly, housing provision in Austria is safeguarded by the following elements: a reliable legal framework, municipal housing owned by the cities and municipalities, a real strong limited profit housing sector, the cost rent scheme of the limited profit housing sector, a rent control regime in parts of the private rental market, a sustainable way of housing finance, a strong infrastructure of assisted housing, targeted housing allowances, and a strong position of housing in civil society. So that's been from my side.
Muchas gracias, Susanne, por tu presentación. Interesantísimo el modelo de la ciudad de Viena. Cómo nos demuestras que se puede tener una vivienda accesible y que también eso produzca beneficios para la ciudad. Ahora me gustaría dar paso a la segunda parte, digamos, de esta sesión, donde vienen las preguntas de nuestras expertas. Entonces voy a invitar primero a la estudiante de Administración Pública de la Universidad de Chile, Isidora Cofré. Ella tiene unas preguntas para las expertas. Isidora.
Hola, muchas gracias por la invitación. Tengo dos preguntas. A lo largo de sus presentaciones pudieron dar algunas luces de ellas. La primera es que, entendiendo el componente humano intrínseco que supone el acceso a la vivienda, ¿se encuentra contemplado dentro de sus políticas y o planes de vivienda la participación ciudadana? Si es así, ¿de qué forma han logrado concretizar dicha acción? Y la segunda pregunta tiene relación que dentro de las discusiones más relevantes en torno a vivienda es el aseguramiento del cumplimiento de los estándares de calidad de los complejos habitacionales. Entonces, en este sentido, ¿cuáles son los estándares mínimos a considerar a la hora de implementar las políticas de vivienda? ¿Qué mecanismos son implementados para asegurar el cumplimiento de los estándares de calidad? Esas serían las preguntas. Muchas gracias.
No sé quién le gustaría responder, y puede responder cada una si quiere las dos preguntas o específicamente una. Quizás empezaría en el mismo orden Laura a responder.
Vale.
Perfecto. Laura.
Thank you. Well, the participation of citizens is part of the process of planning. This is defined by law, and so all the process of planning tools recognize participation. And I have to say that during the last year, participation increased, for example, in the regeneration projects. And some regions, for example, the region of the Emilia-Romagna is the region with the city of Bologna. Bologna was a very important city. With the housing policies very strong, very important. Some region, as Emilia-Romagna, have introduced participatory planning processes applied to urban regeneration in their regulation, of the process of planning. And so this is an important step. There is a lot of work to do. There is a lot of work to do, but the law is the law, the regulations, as you can say, the approach is increasing this idea to involve citizens and different categories of people. And about the second question, well, the law defines the minimum quality, such as dimensions and standards, the green, the social services, and all that, you know? And so it's defined by law. There is in Italy there is an important debate about standard and about a new idea, a new use, you can say, if I can use this word, about standard, and connected with all the question of the welfare in the city. If I can use one second more, I would like to say that
con todo gusto, Laura.
Thank you. Right to house is recognized by the Constitution, the Italian Constitution, but as I said, we have a lot of work to do for realizing that. And even if the Austrian Constitution, the housing is not recognized, the right to house is not recognized, as Susanne said, is not recognized in the Constitution. But, well, the number that you, Susanne, show as are very important and explain what means to have consistent policies on housing question. This is very important. It's not only the law, it's the practice. It's the practice that is very important. Thank you.
Susanne, ¿podrías tú responder?
Yes, no, I just have to. Laura, I must say, you really made me think quite a lot, because if you talked about participation, I was thinking, what kind of participation do you mean? So I'm just going to threaten you in inverted commas. Before we start planning, there is a participation in the master plan for participation in urban development. So I'll just give you 3 angles just to create, hopefully to create an impression about this all. So what we are doing is, first of all, we invite people, there's a participation, and what's become very important is feedback. And when do we do it? It has to be a bigger project with about more than 300 residential units or 30,000 square meters. If it's a high-rise building, and there are more criteria. So if you like, please come back to me. I can give you further details. Who can get involved? That means all residents who live in about a radius of 500 meters, also local actors and future residents could have their say. And what's very important to have a feedback, because people will ask, okay, I've been so involved, now what's the outcome? That does not mean that we will answer all questions or can do everything right. However, it's an active engagement on behalf of the city with the tenants, and I think not with the tenants, with the people. And that's very, very important. Now, if I'm jumping the second angle, if you are now a tenant in Wiener Wohnen, in the company I work for, we've got a coded determination statute for the tenants of the residential complexes. So what can they do? It's also about information, control, and participation rights. For example, it takes place in the maintenance and improvement of residential complexes. The operation costs, this is really quite often a very tricky topic. Construction and maintenance of elevators, community facilities, which is really, really becoming more and more important. And the change of property management. Now, giving the third angle is, we've got self-building groups or building communities. Now, this is a translation. Subsidized housing in Vienna does not only take place on large urban development sites, but like-minded people can also join forces within the framework of individual co-determination in order to realize the dream of living together with subsidized from the city. So they could come up with their ideas, and they have this process of creating housing is characterized of building communities. They have to join together and stay together. And from the project idea to planning and construction to use, decisions are made jointly and supported by the group. That's very, very important for the process. This results in really exciting new concepts and housing supply, and ensures also social integration. And you also will find, just to say, to name some other target groups, like special housing for elderly or for young people. And we also offer support for single parents. So this is all part of our system. Now, this was one question. And the next one is also very thrilling, the one about qualities. So first of all, Republic of Austria now become very Austrian. We've got a building code on building regulations. I say it in a very ironic way. It's not ironic at all, because you have to obey, I can tell you, because they are a binding law for all buildings, actually from application to notice of completion. They include like mechanical resistance and stability, safety in case of fire, energy economy, heat retention, protection against noise, and also some environmental rules. Now, what we're doing in Vienna, if you go into social and affordable housing, we have got developer competitions. This is a very special tool. The developer competition is an instrument of subsidized social housing. We've got it since 1995. It's for 300,000 units and more. And it's a publicly awarded procedure and serves to identify project teams that offer optimized realization concepts in the area of architecture, economic, ecological, and social sustainability. I'll happily explain what we mean with that. On the tender building side, and realize its projects by way of property acquisition and by using housing subsidies. So what we are guaranteeing is, while you're building social housing, you cannot do it in a cheap way. In a cheap way means ugly is probably the nicest way, but we had some severe incidents of fire, of bad insulation, of mold up. And these things should, as good as we can, not take place because we do control. Thing is, when the city of Vienna offers a subsidy, there are some rules you have to obey to, otherwise you can't take the subsidy. So but it's transparent. You know before what we expect, and you know how much money you get for that. And it has finally also to fit into the city and to fit into the area. So social sustainability is, for example, also the questions of common room or common ground. And this is becoming more and more important. So especially now during the time of Corona, we suddenly realized how precious green space, green area or balcony is. So this goes more into this direction to give a very, very short definition what is meant by social sustainability. So please feel free just to ask if you think this was too superficial or you want to go deeper in it or it wasn't clear enough.
Tengo que responder en español, pero estuvo perfecto. De hecho, ese era el ángulo que buscábamos con la pregunta, el hecho de estas actualizaciones a los estándares de calidad en el siglo XXI, considerando todas las situaciones que suceden. Así que muchísimas gracias, Laura y Susanne, por sus respuestas.
Y gracias a ti, Isidora, por tus interesantes preguntas. Ahora hemos escogido, para honrar el tiempo, solo 2 preguntas de las varias preguntas que nos han llegado del público. Así que voy a leer las 2 preguntas escogidas para que Laura y Susanne, si puedan, hay tiempo, pueden responder las 2 o escoger una de las 2. Una de las preguntas que nos llegó de Verónica Delgado señala, dice, ¿qué es lo más efectivo poner en la Constitución? Sobre el derecho a la vivienda, por supuesto, para que no sea letra muerta o sea demasiado difícil implementar el derecho. Y la segunda pregunta escogida es de Daniela Muñoz, quien nos dice, ¿cuáles son los desafíos para materializar el derecho a la vivienda en un panorama post-pandemia, teniendo presentes las olas migratorias acentuadas por la misma que se han dado tanto en Europa como en América Latina? Esas son las preguntas escogidas de nuestro público en esta interesante sesión. ¿Te gustaría empezar, Laura?
First, Susanne.
Susanne?
Yeah. First of all, I think my personal opinion is it is very good to have the right to housing in the Constitution. Because this is very, very helpful. It also shows how the value of housing is. And we quite often talk about housing as the second skin. So this is really absolutely elementary for the living. So this is one challenge. We could see in the case of Italy, which Laura just explained wonderfully, this is part of the constitution. In Austria, it's not. However, both states are really striving to fulfill the right of housing. And we've got different ways. And this is very important because why I warn you is just having it in the constitution or not realizing it. These are 2 different things, and realizing it is challenging. It's challenging because once upon a time, not that long ago, till 1989, Vienna was a shrinking city. So we had to become from a shrinking city to a rapidly growing city. Now, building takes time. We have got standards to fulfill. I just mentioned some of them. So it has to be managed. And it's not just about housing. You have to have the whole infrastructure and also social infrastructure. it's not probably necessary to live in the city, but you have to have, or you should have, some public transport. Otherwise, you have to take a car, which is not environmentally friendly. So we have to think together a smart city. And one solution could also say, okay, we have got, like you have the wonderful big city of Chile, we have got Viena. So probably it's also another option could be having a good broadband and working from abroad. That could also be possible. What I'm saying is, yes, I personally support the goal of having the right of housing in the institution. And furthermore, you have to have institutions working together also for a smart city. And in our case, the limited profit housing associations make clear that housing is not on the market, not only a market segment, it's also a right. So you have to find a way how you could organize the sector without driving people out of their homes because the rents are too high. So this would become a very thrilling political discussion, which we can't lead today, but we have to be aware of it. There are different forces, and we have to bring them together and make the best out of it, of the situation we are in. About the second question, I'm not quite sure if I understood that it was mainly about the challenges. So just could you give me a helping hand, or am I going to the right direction?
Por supuesto. La segunda pregunta, que dije que es de Daniela Muñoz, tiene que ver con cuáles son los desafíos para materializar el derecho a la vivienda en un panorama post-pandemia, teniendo presente las olas migratorias acentuadas que la misma pandemia ha traído tanto a Europa como a América Latina.
You're mentioning a really absolutely hot topic. We are quite happy right now. A lot of people in Austria got vaccinated. I know it's the same in Chile, so this is really great. However, many people are still in a very difficult economic situation. And some couldn't pay their rent because they were on short-time work, some lost their work. So the pandemic caused an awful lot of hardship on millions of families. So first of all, there was an eviction ban. However, to be honest, this ban will not last forever. What will happen then? What's going to happen to the people? So what Austria is doing, we created a fund, we are supplying it with money so that there is a so-called third party trying to help and to support. The pandemic itself will last longer than we would like it to last, and we will need a lot of social measures to help people which are in need. So right now we still have got the eviction ban, but we have to think about the time when this will end and what could be done then to prevent evictions. And that must be the aim, not to push people out into hardship. I'm a bit vague. I know there is the fund. It will work. However, it's still, we have to work on it because it's clear in municipal housing and the limited profit housing companies are very clear that they are going to help. However, on the private market, things are a bit more difficult, and this is mainly where we'll need the fund to prevent evictions.
Gracias, Susanne. Laura?
Oh, yeah, thank you for the questions. To recognize, I think that it's important to recognize the right to housing in the Constitution, in particular taking care of the categories, the low income categories of low income people. This, I think, is a sustainable criteria. As I said, as you said before, but then we have to realize that, and this is another this is another problem that occurred also in Italy. So we have good principles, but then we have to realize, to transform this principle in practices. This is very important, and this is what I think my country and also Chile, that is in this interesting process, a constitutional process, as to do. And because it's not simply to write the constitution, it's very important, of course, for a country, but it's not only a question of to write the right things. And about the second question, well, the COVID, if I understand correctly the question, I'm not sure about that, but well, the COVID increased some difficult situation all over the world, and we know that. But the housing problem existed before COVID. It's not a problem of COVID. It's simply more evident, more eviction, for example, that I said before in my country will be a problem maybe in the next months. But so the problem is before this situation, and now in Europe and also in Italy we have an important step, the recovery fund. The recovery fund, and so a very big amount of money, very important policy of intervention of European Union on the countries, or all the countries of Europe, will be a very, I think, a very important opportunity if this money will be spent very, very well with the project, clear project. And I think that housing has to be one of the topic of the intervention of the recovery fund. In my country, I'm sure about that. As I said before, I think that in Italy we have to fund housing, the existing capital, but also we have to build new public housing. Public housing, social housing, because as I try to say, the articulation of the needs is different, and we have to try to find different solution to the different problem and to the different request of citizen. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, Laura, por tu respuesta también. Y con esto ya estamos concluyendo esta nueva sesión del ciclo de debates Contrapuntos Chile-Unión Europea para el proceso constituyente. Quiero agradecer especialmente a las dos invitadas por tomarse el tiempo. En Europa es época de vacaciones en agosto, así que gracias Laura, gracias Susanne, ha sido un privilegio tenerlas el día de hoy, conocer las experiencias, ya sea en Italia, ya sea de la ciudad de Viena. Ha sido muy enriquecedor, estoy seguro también para todos los que vean o han visto o luego en la retransmisión esta sesión, muy interesante. Así que les agradezco al público también que nos está viendo y por supuesto los dejo invitados para que estén atentos a la próxima sesión de este ciclo de debates. Así que saludos a todos y muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.